Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back to the recent past. It's a few years now, but still the most recent past of Gran Turismo in GT6, to another car in the same vein as the Lexus LFA that we looked at on Monday, which I believe has actually a good chance of returning either in this game or in the future of the series, and that is a massively popular race car in GT6, of course, a Super GT car, GT500 in particular, the Honda HSV-010. Now there are 4 different versions of this car in the regular version of the game, 5 if you include the anniversary. You've got 3 different liveries, a couple of blue ones and a silver one, slightly different performance rankings between them, but the power, the weight and the torque are all the same until you tune them. Then of course you have the base model which you can paint, and obviously that 15th anniversary car. And maybe it's just me, but I've always found this car to be kind of fascinating. Not that it was a car that I used a huge amount. I actually didn't use the HSV-010 a lot, probably because many people did. I'm kind of an automotive hipster in that way. But I find it fascinating because it really stands out on the grid in terms of having no road-going counterpart. That always struck me as strange with this car. Of course, you don't have to make a road-going version, which I guess is why Honda didn't, but it seems strange given how amazingly good it is in the game at least, and how many people loved it, almost, somewhat ironically, in a similar way to the Lexus LFA, and it's a car with a similar kind of vibe to that even, similar shape, similar sound, high revving, race kind of design, and yet no road version. That is very curious to me, and to me, I was actually thinking of this car in a new way when I re-drove it to do this review, and it's a way that I'd never thought of before. This is the car version of a Honda Fireblade. That is exactly what this is. It's a car which is screaming, high-revving, hardcore, track-focused, and extremely competitive, but at the same time, it's grippy, it's surprisingly smooth, and surprisingly forgiving. In other words, it shares all of the primary traits of Honda's top-tier superbikes, the Fireblades. To me, that is what the HSV-010 is. This could easily be a fantastic LFA rival if it were a road form at least, and although the engine is very different, it has a lot of similarities. It somewhat ironically has less power than the road-going Lexus at 493, not very much torque, which again isn't surprising for a high-revving race engine, 289 pound-feet. The weight is on the lower end of the GT500 spectrum, which is 1100 kilos on the dot, and the capacity is pretty small as well, in fact no way near the size of the Lexus, which is a 4.8 litre V10 in road form. This one's a 3.4 litre in race form. So even amongst GT500s, there are a few which are bigger, a couple of the Supras in particular. But of course, the primary thing that most people found this car useful for was grip. It is a cornering monster. It's a car which could not just take on GT500s in, of course, the Super GT category, but you could easily take on things way higher than that, sometimes even prototypes, under the right circumstances. It was a fantastic car for any technical circuit, any track which didn't really need much top-end speed and was more about acceleration and cornering. Now, as I said, I didn't personally use the car a huge amount, but I do have a, not exactly hot take, but certainly a specific take about this car, and that is that if this were to come back, let's say in GT Sport, I believe A, of course it would be in Group 2, because it wouldn't make any sense anywhere else, but also I believe it would not only be probably the most popular car amongst the fans in Group 2, I believe it might actually be the best one. Now of course, keeping up with the newer Super GTs that we now have in the franchise could be a completely different ballgame for a car like this, but I do believe it has the chops to at least take them on, because in terms of the HSV-010's setup and the way it performs, it's a vehicle which feels, to me at least, somewhere in between the two kind of eras of GT500 that we have. We've got the absolute newest that we've ever had in the series in GT Sport, and that is of course the Lexus, the Honda and the Skyline, or the GTR I should say, and then you've got the older ones which we had in this game as well, like your Supras, the R34 generation Skylines, that kind of stuff. To me this Honda feels somewhere in between the two. It still comes from the years of having a slightly bigger body kit and more of a distinctive, almost supercar or GT1 style silhouette, whereas these days the silhouettes of Super GT cars is much more restrained. And these days it's actually very similar, of course, to a DTM car, which makes all kinds of sense. Now, this one of course would be popular. I already mentioned that. It was popular in GT6. In terms of pricing, it was 980,000 credits, making it actually one of the most expensive Super GT cars in the game. Not necessarily too surprising given how good it was. It's almost like they knew that this thing would be popular. I mean, what's not to love? And I do believe once again that if it came back, the price would probably be different. It is a curious car as to how they would bring it back though, because even in GT6, to me at least, this car always stood out. It doesn't quite feel like any of the other GT500s. It feels like it shouldn't really be even eligible. The fact that there's no road version, the fact that it has almost like a completely different style of performance to all of those cars, and regardless of its real-world success or lack of success, in the game, to me it feels like its own thing. It feels like a GT3 or even a GT1 from the 2000s. And that brings me back to the point that I made earlier, which is if they were to bring the HSV-10 back, how on earth would it fit into GT Sport? Because so far, they brought the 3 newer GT500s together. Then, a few months later, they added the around 2006 generation trio. If you were going to add this car, would you add it on its own? Or would you add it in another trio? Because if they did, I can't really think of 2 other cars that would make sense alongside it. You could argue maybe a Yellow Hat Supra, but apart from that, there's not really much else. I mean, I could feasibly imagine them adding this, the Yellow Hat Supra, and maybe like the Zanavi Nismo Z, like the 350Z, maybe, because they're slightly different. But again, still doesn't really feel like it fits in there. It's a fascinating car, as I said, I've always found it to be a fascinating vehicle. I can certainly see why so many people love it, but funnily enough, in a similar way to the LFA, which it's of course so similar to, I've never really used either of those cars all that much in Gran Turismo. Again, totally understand why people love them, just wasn't one of my go-to options. I will often go for more of an underdog. Overall though, I do think it's a car that would definitely be absolutely incredible with the updated physics and sound of Gran Turismo. Maybe more so the physics side of things than the sound given the track record, but I do think it's a fascinating car that could have a ton of use if it were to come back. Chances of it coming back, I believe, are probably slightly slimmer than some in this list that we're going to re-review, but at the same time, I think a lot of people would be very, very happy to see this one return, and it would certainly make the Group 2 category an interesting place, to say the least. But overall, that's it for my thoughts on the Honda HSV-10. Of course, if you love this car from the GT6 days, tell me all about it down below. Did you maybe not like the car as much? Were you like me, where you didn't really use it? Either way, tell me about it down below, and of course stick around on the channel for more looks back into the history of Gran Turismo to consider some of the cars from GT6, which I at least believe have a pretty strong chance of returning. But overall, that's it for this review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.